Welcome to Traveller's Guide IELTS. In this video, we're going to look at a reading test from Cambridge IELTS Book 19 Academic. We'll look at the questions, the answers, and explain why these are the correct answers. This is reading test 1 from IELTS 19. The IELTS reading test has three passages to read. There are a total of 40 questions and you have 1 hour in which to answer all the questions. And here we can see how your raw score converts into an IELTS band score. So for example, if you score 30 out of 40, that's equal to a band 7. Let's look at section 1 then. And reading passage 1, it says you should spend about 20 minutes on this, questions 1 to 13. And the passage is entitled, How Tennis Rackets Have Changed. In the first 7 questions, you need to decide whether it is true, false, or not given. So select true if the statement agrees with the information, false if the statement contradicts the information, and not given if there is no information on this. Let's now look at question 1. People had expected Andy Murray to become the world's top tennis player for at least 5 years before 2016. Right, so I'm going to use Andy Murray and 2016 as my keywords to find the right section of the reading passage. So I can see from this paragraph it mentions Andy Murray and starts with in 2016. So I know I'm in the right place. Now let's have a look. So synonyms for expected, there in yellow, maybe regarded. In green it says 5 years before, and the passage says 5 years previously. And then the blue section says world's top tennis player from the question, whereas in the passage it says talented outsider, which is not exactly the same thing at all. It's someone who plays tennis, is quite good at it, but outsider means they're not one of the best. Therefore, the answer to this one is false. People did not expect that before 2016. People at that time thought he was an outsider. Question 2. The change that Andy Murray made to his rackets attracted a lot of attention. Right, again we've got Andy Murray, and this time it's about change. So the next paragraph mentions Murray a couple of times and starts with of the changes. So we're in the right place here. Looking at the question, let's focus on the part that says attracted a lot of attention. Well, we have a phrase that means the same thing in yellow, widely publicized. So was this a change to his rackets though? This was talking about a former number 1, Ivan Lendl, who became his coach. So that's a change to his coaching team, not a change to his rackets. Whereas there's another change later on which is described as subtle and unnoticed. And this is the change to his racket, which is the opposite of attracted a lot of attention. So the answer to this one is also false. Number 3, most of the world's top players take a professional racket stringer on tour with them. Right, so we found the phrase professional racket stringer in this paragraph here in green. Now, the yellow sections that talks about rackets being customized, rackets might be individually made, and there's a bit about a top manufacturer transporting rackets to Tampa, Florida. So maybe they have a professional racket stringer with them on tour, but it doesn't give us this information. So we need to go for not given for question 3. Not given is always a difficult one because there's nothing there to find. So if you're looking for the answer for what seems like too long, go with not given, because the chances are the information is not there to be found. Number 4, Mike and Bob Bryan use rackets that are light in comparison to the majority of rackets. Well, Mike and Bob Bryan. Let's find the paragraph about them. Here we are. And we're looking for light in comparison and majority of. So in green in the passage, I've highlighted the average model. So average somewhere in the middle, majority of would be more than the average. Okay, but it says light in comparison in yellow, and in the passage it says weighs more than, which is the opposite. So the answer to number 4 is also false. They're not lighter than most, they are heavier than most. Okay, moving on to question 5. Werner Fischer played with a spaghetti-strung racket that he designed himself. Okay, so I'm going to look for his name and the phrase spaghetti-strung, and that leads me to this section of the passage. Now, there's spaghetti-strung racket in yellow, but he designed it himself. This is an important part. It tells us when he started playing with it, and it tells us a bit about how it's used. It doesn't say if he designed it or not. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't, we don't know. So we have to go with not given on this one. On to number 6. The weather can affect how professional players adjust the strings on their rackets. How professional players adjust the strings. Let's look for something about that, and here it is in this passage. So players in green coincides with they in the passage. Change is adjust in blue. And then this part in yellow, weather in the question matches up with climatic conditions. So that sounds like they do change it. They do adjust the strings based on the weather. So we'll go with true on this one. That does happen. Question 7. It was believed that the change Pete Sampras made to his rackets contributed to his strong serve. Right, Pete Sampras, let's find him in the passage. Here he is mentioned in this section. Right, okay. His strong serve in yellow there matches up with his serving power. Power and strength often go hand in hand. There we are, so we're in the right bit. Contributed to in green was attributed to. It's kind of the same sort of thing. And here it talks about the change in blue. In the passage it mentions the addition of 4 to 5 lead weights. That's an example of a change that he made. This is all sounding like it agrees with the statement, so we will go with true. Number 8 to 13. Okay, these are complete the notes with one word only from the passage. That is very important, one word only. It's still about the tennis racket and how it has changed. So let's look at the next question, number 8. Mike and Bob Bryan made changes to the types of what used on their racket frames. So again, we're going to look for Mike and Bob Bryan. Back to this section. Okay, what did they make changes to the types of? Well, they have adjusted things, so that's making changes. That's talking about adjusting the racket length. That's not really about the frames though. But a bit further on it says they experimented with different kinds of paint. And it talks about types of something, types of, kinds of. So number 8, the answer we're looking for is paint. Number 9, players were not allowed to use the spaghetti-strung racket because of the amount of what it created. Again, spaghetti-strung racket is in this section. Not allowed to use, that is an explanation of the word banned. So in green, if something is banned, people are not allowed to use it. Then going back a bit, generated means the same as the word created. So the racket created so much topspin. Therefore, the answer is topspin. The amount of so much is an amount. Topspin, it's the way the ball turns through the air. Changes to rackets can be regarded as being as important as players' diets or the something that they do. Right, a bit about changes in rackets. Racket modifications means changes. As important as, in yellow, is the same as is equal in significance to, and in blue there, diets can also be called nutrition. So in the paragraph it says nutrition or training, and the question talks about diets or the something they do. So we can put the word training into space number 10. (11) All rackets used to have natural strings made from the something of animals. Natural strings. This bit talks about the strings of the rackets, and strung with natural something is same as natural strings. The paragraph starts with at one time, which could match up with used to be or used to have. And we have a mention of sheep and cow in there, which are examples of animals. So, now when I first saw this question, I thought there are two possible answers for this. And when I checked the answers, I was relieved to see that both of them were acceptable. So you can only put one word, but either of these words is acceptable. You can either choose gut or intestines. Not both, but one or the other is fine. There we go. They're both kind of different words for the same thing anyway. There we are. Next, number 12. Pete Sampras had metal something put into the frames of his rackets. Right, we've already seen this bit about Pete Sampras. So let's go back to that section. Now, metal in yellow, we can see that lead is an example of metal. It's a kind of metal. Put into, addition, onto, this kind of things. So what did he put on there? Lead weights, metal weights. So number 12, the word weights can fit in that sentence. And we don't write lead weights for two reasons. First, the word lead is already covered by metal, and secondly, it's one word only. So next, Gonçalves Oliveira changed the something on his racket handles. All right, so we'll find his name in the passage. There we go, and it also mentions handle, so we're in the right place. Changed, replaced something. So what did he replace? The original grips. Now, in the sentence, original grips would make sense, but remember we can only use one word. So instead of original grips, we're just going to use the word grips. Original adjective describing the grips. We don't really need that one in the answer for it to still make sense. If we just use the word original, that wouldn't make sense. So grips is the answer. Right, on to reading section 2. This time it's a passage about the pirates of the ancient Mediterranean, which is a sea between Europe and Africa. Now, this section should also take about 20 minutes. If you're practicing or reading at home, give yourself 20 minutes for each section so we get used to the time. And it's questions 14 to 26 in this section. The first set of questions, 14 to 19, you need to choose which paragraph contains the following information. So you just need to choose A, B, C, D, E, F, or G, and each of the paragraphs has a letter at the start. This is an important notice at the bottom though. You may use any letter more than once. So don't think if you've used the letter A, for instance, that it can't be A again, because it can. Right, number 14. Which passage contains a reference to a denial of involvement in piracy. Okay, which paragraph? Well, denial of involvement is the key phrase here. And here in section D, this is where the answer can be found. Can you see where it talks about denial of involvement? Well, in this section, denial, rejected, involvement, connection. So the king rejected his claims. He was denying his involvement. That's where the answer is. Question 15. Which paragraph contains details of how a campaign to eradicate piracy was carried out? So we're looking for something that talks about a campaign to eradicate piracy. That can be found in section G. So we're looking for words that line up with campaign and eradicate. Campaign could be the process of doing something, and eradicate means it's all gone or was free of. There in yellow is the phrase from the passage. This is what points us to section G being correct. On to number 16. A mention of the circumstances in which states in the ancient world would make use of pirates. Where can we find that? So we need to focus on the ancient world and making use of. That can be found in section C. Okay, so the first and second millennia BCE, that is definitely the ancient world. So that's 1,000 years BC up and, well, around that time. Blue, make use of, so their services. And which circumstances, an example of what the circumstances are, is during wartime. So that's why C is the right answer for 16. 17. Which paragraph contains a reference to how people today commonly view pirates? So it's about today and people's opinions. Now, when I saw this statement, I was immediately drawn to the start of the passage, because that's where I would expect this sort of information to be, in the introduction. And sure enough, there it is in section A. So today, notice that the words in yellow, like mentions or springs, are in the present tense. So that's a bit of a clue that it's talking about nowadays. Commonly, most people, and view, an image in people's minds. So that is why section A is correct for 17. 18. Which paragraph contains an explanation of how some people were encouraged not to return to piracy? Encouraged not to return is key here, and that can be found in section G. And we've already used G once, but we can use it again. Let's see why this is correct. So encouraged, in what way were they encouraged? They were offered land and not to return. Instead, they became farmers. On to 19 now, and we need to find a mention of the need for many sailing vessels to stay relatively close to land. That relatively close to land can be found in paragraph B, the second half of paragraph B. Here we can see sailing vessels is another term for ships, but close to land, it talks about coves along the coast, and later followed the coastline. So that is why they were there. 20 and 21, from the same passage, there are two statements that the writer makes about the inhabitants of the Mediterranean region. So we're looking for two of these which are mentioned in the passage. Now they might all be correct. They might, if you were to look up the history online. They might all turn out to be true, but we need to find the ones that are mentioned in the passage. So let's move that over there and get section B. It did talk about inhabitants of the Mediterranean region. So section B talks about some of these inhabitants. Let's look at the different options. So A talks about using stolen vessels, but the paragraph says most had their own boats, so they didn't need to steal boats. And again, maybe some of them did, because it said most had their own boats, not all of them. But they often used, no, not often, perhaps sometimes, but we can rule out A. That one is not correct. Next, if we look at B, they managed to escape authorities and knew the area so well. Well, knowledge of the local area shows that they knew the area. The authorities mentioned are the state fleet, and they could manage to escape. They avoided retaliation. So that sounds like B is correct. B is mentioned in the passage, so let's put a circle around that. Next, we'll look on to C. They paid for information about the routes. There's the sailing routes mentioned. But they had unsurpassed knowledge. Unsurpassed means that there is nothing better than that. So no one else knows any more about the routes than they do. So they would have no need to pay for information. This one, let's rule that one out as well. So C is gone. And then D. They depended on the sea more than farming. Well, depended, relied on, and the sea, marine resources. Marine is an adjective referring to the sea. Yes, that seems like they relied heavily on the sea, so more than farming. D sounds like it is true. And if we were to look at E, just to be sure, it talks about them storing goods in coves. Well, it mentions coves. They used to hide their boats in coves. Later on, it talks about how they would take the goods from ships, but it doesn't say anything about them storing the goods in the coves. So again, this could be true, but it is not mentioned in the passage, so we can rule that one out as well. So for questions 20 and 21, the correct answers are B and D. And for this section, it doesn't matter if you put B and D or D and B, as long as 20 is either B or D and 21 is the other one. The same situation happens for 22 and 23. Again, there are 5 statements, and which 2 does the writer make? This time, though, it's about ancient Greece. So let's find the section about the ancient Greece. It starts with the ancient Greek world. Okay, so we're in the right place. First, we're going to look at A, and it says very few people were involved in piracy, but towards the end of this paragraph, it mentions the large number of pirates. And that doesn't sound like very few people. So let's rule out option A. That one is not correct. For B, it talks about how attitudes changed shortly after these 2 literary works were written. Well, this in green in the passage points out that these opinions or attitudes remained unchanged in the following centuries. A century is 100 years. Remained unchanged means they did not change. Therefore, B, not correct either. We can rule that one out. If we look at C, important officials were known to occasionally take part. Important officials, high-ranking members of the state. And then the next part says, in the paragraph says, were not beyond engaging. So that sounds like yes. Occasionally they did take part. Engaging is taking part. So C is correct. And if we have a look at D, every citizen regarded pirate attacks as unacceptable. Well, Homer is mentioned, an ancient Greek writer. He was a citizen and he condoned their action, and he praised the lifestyle. So therefore he doesn't think it was unacceptable. And then there's also mention of a Greek historian, and he glorified their attacks. Therefore he didn't think they were unacceptable either. So we've got examples of at least 2 Greek citizens who did not think they were unacceptable. So D, not correct. Let's rule that out. This would now suggest that E must be correct, but let's just check to make sure. So a favourable view is evident in Greek texts. So there are 2 Greek texts mentioned, Iliad and Odyssey, and favourable is another word for positive. So Homer talks about them in a good way, so that is a favourable view. So yes, E is correct. So to recap, 22 and 23, we need the answers C and E, or E and C. Still on section 2, we're now going to look at 24 to 25. We need to choose one word only from the passage for each answer to fill in these missing gaps. So that is important, one word only, and it must be a word from the passage. If you find that you need to change the word by putting an S on or making an ing form, then that is not going to be correct. The word must stay the same in the passage as it is in the answer. Okay, so I can find the answers to this in section F, or paragraph F. However, attacks on vessels transporting something to Rome resulted in calls for something for the pirates responsible. Now I think question or answer 25 is perhaps the easiest to find, so let's start with that. Culprits in blue is pirates responsible. If you're a culprit, then you've done something. Resulted in, yellow, led to, and then calls for, voices demanding something. So what are the voices demanding? Punishment. So we can write the word punishment in section 25, question 25. Right, and then we can work backwards to find the answer to 24. Attacks on vessels, attacks on ships. There we go. Transporting, carrying what? Now it says that there are grain ships. That means there are vessels transporting grain. Things like wheat or barley or corn. These are grains. So that's the answer to 24. And then looking at 26. Nevertheless, however, it continues. Demanding, asking for, and kidnapped is another way of saying captured. So what are they demanding? What are they asking for? A large ransom. And again, we could put large ransom. That would make sense grammatically, and it would answer the question. Apart from, we need one word only. So large wouldn't make sense. Ransom is the one word that we can use that will make sense. So number 26, ransom. Okay, so 24, grain, 25, punishment, 26, ransom. Let's move on to reading section 3. This also says you should spend 20 minutes on this. The persistence and peril of misinformation is the title of this piece. Number 27, what point does the writer make about misinformation in the first paragraph? Now this is helpful. It tells you where to find the answer in paragraph 1. So let's get that up on the screen. So there it is, talking about misinformation. This is information that is wrong. Deliberately or accidentally, that's fine. But let's have a look at these. It's a relatively recent phenomenon, suggests A, but this says it is not a new problem. So not new is the opposite of relatively recent. A, not correct. Let's look at D then. There may be a number of reasons for the spread of misinformation. Here are some reasons. Gain strategic advantage, motivate others to action, protect interpersonal bonds, or maybe inadvertently. So that sounds like, yes, there are a number of reasons there. So D looks like it's correct. Is there anything about B or C that can change our mind on this one? Well, it doesn't really talk about these things, so let's stick with D. We know A is wrong, there's no information about B and C, and we have examples of reasons, so D is correct. 28. What does the writer say about the role of technology? Let's go to this section then. We're going to look at B. It could alter the way people regard information or change how people think about it. Technology, maybe something about organizations, how they use it. Or D talks about how it's easier for people to check if this information is accurate. I can't find anything about all of these things. But option A, it might, at some point, over time, provide, be found, and a solution is a means to correct something. Therefore, A agrees with what the writer is saying. So let's go with option A for 28. On to 29. What is the writer doing in the fourth paragraph? So again, it's told us where to find the answer, paragraph 4. Let's get that one here and decide what the correct option is. What's the writer doing? Comparing the different opinions. So there's one opinion there, people who tend to believe it, at least initially. It's not really talking about different opinions, just focusing on one. B talks about change over time, but the paragraph is talking about contemporary mass media. So contemporary means nowadays. It's not really talking about change over time, it's just talking about the current situation. And then it does mention policymakers, but doesn't really talk about their attitude. So A, C, and D, not correct. Whereas, A, B, and D. Whereas C outlines which issues there are today. Again, today, contemporary. We know it's about today, but which issues? Media often do not block it, and countering information can be resource intensive. So these are some issues. C is correct. Number 30. What point does the writer make about regulation in the USA? We can find this section that talks about the United States and some regulation things in there. Option B suggests it does not affect people's opinions, but right towards the end it says can continue to affect attitudes. So that can't be correct. It can. And C talks about the USA has more regulatory bodies. Well, it mentions regulatory agencies and organizations such as. So we know it has more than one, but it doesn't compare it to other countries. So we can rule out B and C. Option D talks about it fails to prevent in the media post hoc detection of broadcast information. So that means it's after it has been broadcast. Therefore, you can't prevent something after it's happened. Prevent means stop it before it happens. It also mentions does not involve preemptive censoring. Preemptive, again, is before something happens. And advertising later, there is an example of media. So option D in this case is correct. There was nothing there about the guidelines needing to be simplified, so A, not applicable. So we'll go with D for number 30. Questions 31 to 36. There is a summary, and we need to choose the correct phrase from options A to J that are given here. Okay. So I'll put the phrases up in the top and we'll look at the questions. Now, one thing to notice is that these options do not come directly from the text. So we are going to have to paraphrase. We're not taking words from the passage. What happens when people encounter misinformation? Well, although people have something to misinformation, number 31, that's going to be in this section here. We've seen Descartes and Spinoza being mentioned, and they are in this paragraph, but 31 comes just before that. So let's have a look at the bit before Descartes and Spinoza are first mentioned. Now, misinformation, that is information that is false in orange. We have the word debate there and labelled in both the question and the paragraph. Also, we have true or false, which is pretty much the same as true or untrue. How and when is there again. So we know we're in the right section, but although people have what to misinformation, they have fairly routine for them to come across it. Right, this is the section that we need, and we need to identify which letter matches up with this meaning. So fairly routine for them to come across it, that is the same as frequent exposure to the information. Therefore, G is the correct answer for 31. And 32 is going to be close to this. We have Descartes and Spinoza. There they are, matching up with the question and the paragraph. But then in the yellow section, how people engage with information, human information engagement, right, that is there as well. So what did they have though? There was a contrast between how they described it. So something that is contrasting, which option goes in there? Yep, they had different ideas. J is the correct answer for 32. 33 and 34 next. So moreover, Spinoza believes that a distinct what is involved in these stages. Verify or reject is in there, so we're in the right place. Cognitive process. So a distinct, as distinct means separate there in the passage. What phrase means the same as cognitive process? Cognitive is a way of thinking. Mental operation matches up with cognitive process. So 33, the answer is going to be H. Moving on to 34, it talks about recent research. So we have recent evidence and research. Spinoza's theory, Spinoza's account. Something has supported it. So what supported it? Additional evidence. So this recent empirical evidence supported it. B, additional evidence, is the correct answer for 34. 35 and 36 now. For 35, we have information as if it were true, even if. And that same phrase appears in the passage. Right. So only momentarily. This is the key phrase. Which one of the options means the same as only momentarily? That's for a short period. So 35, we can choose option E. This is for an extremely short period. And then 36, we have resources for skepticism. There it is in both. Different spelling, but okay, that's fine. And resources for perceiving and encoding. That is also in the paragraph. They're in something in the brain. This little phrase, in the brain or of the brain, appears twice. In a different part, I've highlighted in blue. Which of the options remaining can mean in a different part? Option C, different locations. So 36, the answer is C. On to the final section now, 37 to 40, and these are yes, no, not given questions. Choose yes if the statement agrees with the claims of the writer, no if it contradicts the claims, and not given if it's impossible to say. So this is very similar to true, false, not given, but yes, no, not given questions are based on the writer's opinion. Right, so we'll put that up there and look at 37. Campaigns designed to correct misinformation will fail to achieve their purpose if people are unable to understand them. So this section talks about a campaign to correct misinformation. We know we're in the right place. But the next part, fail to achieve their purpose, for them to be persuasive, if people are unable to understand. People need to be able to comprehend them. Understand, comprehend. That's the same. So this sounds like it's actually quite similar to what the writer thinks. Let's go with yes. So the answer to number 37 is yes, it does agree. 38. Attempts to teach elementary school students about misinformation have been opposed. The answer to this is going to be in the same section. So let's look at this again. And a little bit further down we have elementary school, there in yellow. Now it talks about people being unaware. There's potential for misinformation. Something is suggested and there are some efforts mentioned. But there's nothing about people opposing this, these attempts. Efforts is the same as attempts. So not given for this. So it's elementary school is mentioned, but it's whether these attempts have been opposed or not that is the key, and that is not given. So 38 not given. 39, the penultimate question. It may be possible to overcome the problem of misinformation in a relatively short period. So overcoming the misinformation is in this section. The journey forward is an example of overcoming the problem. And it may be, well, it says undoubtedly, which is not the same as may, but it's a degree of possibility. And then in blue, the question says relatively short period, but the passage has a long and arduous one, which is the opposite of relatively short. Therefore, this must be no. The statement contradicts, means it is the opposite. So 39, the answer should be no. Which leads us to the final question, number 40. The need to keep up with new information is hugely exaggerated in today's world. That's going to be in this section here, again, right in the end of the passage. Keeping up with new information, talk about future remedies, continued theoretical consideration, and develop and maintenance of consistent monitoring tools. It sounds like that the writer thinks that these things are important. Does he think that it's exaggerated? That means talked about more than it should be. There's no information about what he thinks about that. He's mentioned it a bit there, but not really given his opinion on how much it should be mentioned. Therefore, number 40, the answer is not clearly given. Right, that is the end of the reading test. Now you should check your score if you've been playing along at home, and then work out what band score you're likely to get if this had been your real test. If you got any of the answers wrong, go back and try to understand why it was wrong. Look for those synonyms, look for the meaning in the passage and the question, and see what matches up and what doesn't. Thanks for watching this IELTS Academic Reading Test video. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel for more videos like this from Traveller's Guide IELTS. You can leave a comment with how well you did, or if there's anything you found particularly difficult. And good luck with your future studies and your actual test when it comes along. Thanks and bye for now.